let's talk about binomial probability. So binomial distribution is just a specific type of discrete probability. But how do we know if it's going to be binomial? That's going to be one of the biggest issues when working through homework or looking at an exam, is how do you know it's a binomial problem? It's all about whether or not there are two outcomes. Binomial experiments will always just have two outcomes. It's a yes or a no. It's a success or a failure. That's what makes it binomial. So if the probability of a success is 0.6, the probability of a failure will be 0.4. Because all probabilities have to add up to 1. And since there's just two possible outcomes, we are able to figure out the probability of both a success and a failure from just being given one of them. Now, this is going to come in handy later on when we talk about standard deviation. So a binomial probability distribution allows us to find the probability of a specific number of successes for a certain number of trials. That's the textbook definition. Now, what does that mean? A binomial probability distribution would allow you, let's say you work in sales, and you have 25 customers that walk in. Those are your number of trials. Your specific number of successes is how many sales are you going to close. So binomial probability distribution would be able to help you find the probability that you make 10 sales out of those 25 customers. So you'll need 3 variables when calculating your binomial probability. You'll need your number of trials. That's your N, your sample size. Your X is your number of successes. So how many sales are you actually closing? And then your P is your probability of a success. So what's the probability that you would make a sale? If we have each of those 3 variables, we can just toss it into an Excel function. So equals binom.dist, and then it's going to ask for 4 pieces. It's going to ask for your X, your N, your P, and then whether it's true or false. And true or false comes from whether you want cumulative or not. And that's going to depend on what you want to find. So when do you use true? You'll use true if you're looking for the probability of less than or more than a certain number of successes. Now, true will always give you the probability of less than. It'll give you the probability of your X value and fewer. So if you ever need to find the probability of more than a certain number of successes, you would still type in true, but then you would do 1 minus whatever your answer was. And that's how we can find the probability of more than a certain number of successes. Now, false is what we use if we need to find the probability of exactly a certain number of successes. So exactly 10 sales, not more than 10 sales, not 10 or fewer, exactly 10. That's when we would use false. Now, we can also find our mean and our standard deviation. Our mean is just N times P. It's our expected value. It's taking your total number of trials times the probability of a success, and that will give you your mean. Your standard deviation, it's pretty simple to calculate as well. We have our 3 variables here. We have our N, our P, and this new one, our Q. Our Q is our probability of a failure. Right? We talked about that earlier when we talked about the 60% chance of a success means it's a 40% chance of a failure. So you can find your probability of a failure by just taking 1 minus p. So we have those three variables. We'll multiply them all together, and we take the square root of it, and that gives you your standard deviation.